Before we dive into today's mystery, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It helps us keep uncovering the unknown. Now, let's begin. From the outside, Demarcus Hayes was the embodiment of success. His restaurant, Chateau Prime, had a months-long waiting list. Wealthy socialites, celebrities, and food critics swooned over his exclusive menu. Aged steaks, exotic meats, flavors no one had quite placed, but everyone raved about. Zuri was the perfect complement to his empire. She wasn't just a food influencer. She was the influencer. Her restaurant reviews dictated trends, and her deep dives into the food industry made her a voice of authority. If she praised a dish, people would flock to taste it. If she condemned a restaurant, it would close within months. Together, they cultivated the perfect image, powerful, successful, untouchable. But perfection is often a lie, because behind the locked doors of Chateau Prime, Demarcus was hiding something horrific. Zuri, despite loving him, had started to sense it. Something was off. Something didn't taste right. And when you spend your life dissecting flavors, uncovering the hidden notes in a dish, you always taste the truth. Zuri's life had two faces. One was a glamorous food critic, the charming influencer with a radiant smile, and a passport full of stamps from the world's best restaurants. The other? The relentless, obsessive, investigative journalist, a hunter who exposed fraud, corruption, and scandals hidden beneath the glitzy world of fine dining. She had taken down corrupt food suppliers, counterfeit wine rings, even a Michelin-starred chef who had been serving customers rat meat instead of steak. She wasn't afraid of the truth, but she had never expected the truth to be sleeping next to her. Her investigations had always been out there, in other cities, in other restaurants. But this time, she started noticing red flags much closer to home. She told herself it was paranoia. She told herself she was imagining things. Until the night, she found the first real clue. It started with the missing shipments. One night, while Zuri was reviewing the restaurant's inventory records for a blog piece, she noticed a discrepancy. High-end steak shipments were ordered but never fully accounted for. She assumed it was an error, maybe an employee theft problem, but then she saw something stranger. Demarcus had late-night deliveries that he personally handled, alone, with no witnesses. No chefs, no kitchen staff, just him. Then there were the customers. Regulars, wealthy, powerful individuals, ordered off-menu meals. These weren't listed anywhere, but Zuri saw Demarcus prepare them in secret. She asked him about it once. He smiled too calmly. Just VIP requests, babe. Nothing big. Zuri didn't press, but something inside her tightened. Then there was a smell. One night, she came home late. Demarcus was still awake, cooking something in their private kitchen. The scent was intoxicating, rich, earthy, savory, but wrong. When she walked in, he quickly hid the dish behind him. "You shouldn't be up," he said smoothly, wiping his hands. "I was just experimenting with something new." Zuri laughed it off, but as she left the room, her stomach churned. She knew every cut of meat, every exotic flavor on earth. But that smell was unlike anything she had ever encountered. And for the first time, she wondered, what the hell was Demarcus cooking? As she pieced together the evidence, another terrifying realization hit her. Demarcus wasn't acting alone. There was someone else, a silent partner, someone who'd been helping him acquire ingredients, ensuring that no one asked questions when people went missing. A supplier, a butcher, someone in the shadows, just as twisted as him. And as if on cue, a notification flashed on Demarcus's phone, sitting on his desk. A message from a number with no name. Zuri's hands shook as she read it. She's getting too close. Handle it. Her blood turned to ice. Her husband had secrets, and now she was one of them. The room was dead silent. Zuri's pulse pounded in her ears as she felt the crushing grip on her wrist. Demarcus's voice was low, almost amused. "What exactly do you think you're doing, love?" She didn't answer. She couldn't, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't just uncovering a story. She was living inside it. Demarcus pried the phone from her trembling fingers. He glanced at the screen, Her social media account was open. The go live button seconds away from being pressed. His jaw clenched. The mask he had worn for years. The charming husband, the culinary genius, the respected businessman cracked. A different man stood in front of her now. A man who knew what had to be done. I always admired your tenacity, Zuri. His voice was smooth, controlled. But you've gone too far. She yanked her arm back, stumbling away from him. I know what you are, Demarcus. His lips curled into something not quite a smile. No, you only think you know. Then in a single, fluid motion, he lunged. The impact sent him crashing into the dining table. Zuri clawed his face, her nails raking his skin. He gritted his teeth, grabbed a fistful of her hair, and slammed her head against a marble surface. The pain was blinding. She barely registered the moment he grabbed something from the counter. A butcher's knife, large, gleaming, familiar. The one he always used in his restaurant. The one she had seen him wield with expert precision. Now it was meant for her. Zuri fought. She kicked, screamed, twisted in his grip. But Demarcus was stronger, more controlled. The first stab was like fire exploding in her stomach. She gasped, choking on air, on pain, on the impossible realization that this was real. This was happening. To her, Demarcus held her close as she struggled. Not out of love, not out of remorse, out of necessity. She was the first person who had ever come close to stopping him. And now, she had to be removed. The second stab tore through her ribs. Her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the floor, her vision fading, her mind refusing to accept that the man she once loved was the one ending her life. Above her, Demarcus sighed, like this was just another task, another meal to prepare. Her blood pooled around her. Her body grew cold. But her last thought? He won't stop. Demarcus stood over her lifeless form, his chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. No panic, no hesitation, only precision, the way a chef thinks, the way a butcher thinks. With cold efficiency, he moved quickly. He grabbed thick plastic sheets from the garage, something he had used before, and wrapped her body, making sure no trace of blood was left behind. The house? Spotless. The crime scene? Erased. Now he had to get rid of her. And there was only one place no one would suspect. His restaurant. The drive was long, silent. The city lights blurred past as he made his way to Chateau Prime. The restaurant was empty. The doors locked. No one would disturb him here. He dragged Zuri's body inside, to the industrial kitchen, the very place where he had prepared some of the most exclusive meals in the city. This time, the ingredients were different. For years, Demarcus had been perfecting his technique, breaking down meat with delicate precision, making sure nothing was wasted. Now he did the same to Zuri. His hands, so skilled, so practiced, moved with their usual grace. And as the first cut sliced through her flesh, a twisted curiosity took hold of him. He had never eaten one of them before. The others? They were for the VIP clientele. This was personal. He selected a cut from her thigh, seasoned it with salt, pepper, a touch of garlic. Nothing excessive. The pan sizzled as the meat hit the surface. A rich, intoxicating aroma filled the air. And then, with steady hands, he took a bite. The taste was unlike anything he had ever known. Intense, sweet, rich. For a moment, pure euphoria washed over him. Then it was gone. The job wasn't finished yet. For the first few days, no one noticed Zuri was missing. She was always busy, always on the move. So when she missed a few calls, people assumed she was traveling. But then, her social media went silent. Zuri Carter, a woman who posted daily, who updated her followers about every meal, every trip, every thought, was suddenly gone. Her best friend called Demarcus. He answered smoothly, the perfect act. Concerned, but not panicked. She needed time away, he said. Work was stressful. She just wanted to clear her mind. At first, they believed him. Until a week passed. Then another. And still, no Zuri. Her family filed a missing persons report. Detectives started asking questions. Demarcus remained calm. He invited them into his home. They found nothing. He let them search the restaurant. They found nothing. But one detective, a veteran with a gut instinct that had never failed him, sensed something was wrong. If Zuri left on her own, why didn't she take her car? Why didn't she use her credit cards? Why didn't she tell anyone? Then they found it. Her phone records. Her last known location. And when they traced it, it led them straight to Chateau Prime. Detectives stood in the pristine kitchen of Chateau Prime, the air thick with the scent of bleach and raw meat. Everything was too clean, too perfect, but something felt off. Then they found it. The freezers. The locks were heavy-duty industrial grade, far more secure than what a normal restaurant needed. Open them, one of the officers ordered. A chef protested. You can't do that. You need. Crack. A crowbar wedged into the lock, forcing the steel door open. The moment the freezer swung wide, the entire room went silent. Inside, neatly stacked, vacuum-sealed bags of meat filled the shelves. Each was labeled. Each was perfectly portioned. And then, one officer pulled out a bag, held it to the light. A fingernail. A human fingernail. The detective turned pale. He grabbed another bag. Slicing it open, a chunk of flesh fell onto the table. Forensics tested it immediately. The DNA results? Zuri Carter. The illusion was shattered. Demarcus Hayes, beloved chef, celebrity, icon of the culinary world, was a cannibal, and his customers had been eating human flesh for years without knowing. The evidence was overwhelming. But when authorities went to arrest Demarcus at his home, he was gone. His house was emptied overnight. The only thing left behind? An abandoned suitcase. Inside, officers found stacks of cash, a burner phone, a fake passport. He had planned his escape in advance. Demarcus knew that if anyone ever got too close, he would have to disappear. But they weren't about to let him. The manhunt began immediately, and within 48 hours, the fugitive chef was spotted at a private airstrip outside Houston. He was boarding a plane, one final attempt to flee the country. But before he could step inside, FBI, put your hands where we can see them. The officers surrounded him. Demarcus stayed eerily calm. He raised his hands, his expression unreadable. He had spent his entire life crafting the perfect persona, a chef, a husband, a visionary. Now, all the world would see was a monster. The trial was a media circus. The moment the charges were announced, the world erupted in horror, murder, dismemberment, cannibalism. Every major news outlet covered the case. Every former patron of Chateau Prime wondered, had I eaten human flesh? When Demarcus finally stepped into the courtroom, he showed no emotion. He pleaded, not guilty. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. How could he possibly deny it? The DNA evidence was there. The recorded purchases of industrial cleaning supplies, the secret menu orders for his VIP clients, the bodies, God knows how many, that had been processed and served to unsuspecting customers. But Demarcus remained cold, detached. His lawyer spun a twisted defense. The restaurant had been sabotaged. The human remains were planted. There was no proof he had actually killed Zuri. But the prosecution shredded those arguments apart. And when Zuri's final investigation notes were played aloud, her voice full of urgency, full of fear, even Demarcus couldn't meet their eyes. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. Their verdict? Guilty. On February 10th, 2025, Demarcus Hayes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge read his sentence, he showed no remorse, no apology, no plea for leniency. He simply stood, nodded once, and was led away in shackles. The world had lost a celebrated chef, but it gained a nightmare that would haunt history forever. But even with Demarcus behind bars, the case wasn't over, because one question remained. Who was his accomplice? Forensics had uncovered traces of a second set of fingerprints in the kitchen. A second chef, someone who had been helping him acquire victims, process the meat, and dispose of the evidence. But by the time authorities issued a warrant, he was already gone, disappeared, Somewhere in the world, a butcher in the shadows still walked free. And if he had learned anything from Demarcus's downfall, he would be smarter, more careful, more ruthless. The forbidden feast wasn't over. It had only just begun. And now, the question I leave you with, what if you already eaten something you weren't supposed to? Because here's the terrifying truth. How well do you really know what's on your plate? If this story disturbed you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more Mythcast episodes that explore the darkest corners of truth, lies, and horror. Until next time, eat carefully. You never know what's really in your meal.